out into the world, play, get off of their screen, get off of their phone, go out in the world and learn through playing activities, and then coming back and having, kind of quest-based, skill-based, AI facilitated ways of, again, helping kind of guide and coach and facilitate the learning that's happening through very, very regular things like going on treasure hunts and building paper airplanes and the like. And kind of the last big pillar of that as well is focusing on that kind of post-secondary to workforce transition, helping very explicitly people that are, trying to move into the workforce or are kind of reskilling and moving back into the workforce with many, many projects. We're scaling right now across the states of Colorado, Connecticut, Tennessee, and elsewhere in the world. This idea and the way that we work with it too can be applied in all sorts of different contexts. So we do work in formal contexts, but also informal contexts. I don't have a slide for it, but for example, we work with the Global Scouts organization so that scouts around the world can take advantage of the same technology. With that, kind of the specific ways that we layer in AI for education is, one, that maybe some of you are more familiar with, which is this way of trying to understand how people can learn alongside AI. And so this is kind of the point of view that I think I bring to this conversation and I want to engage all of you with is, it's easy to talk about other people. It's easy to talk about a lot of the pilot case studies, that we have, but I like to make it really, really personal, which is the way that I personally use AI to learn or to facilitate my learning in a day-to-day base. And I want to know and learn today, the ways that you are all experimenting with. I think we already got two really interesting examples of, using AI to help you synthesize, conversations that happen in a meeting like this, that help you distill information so that you can learn from it differently than maybe you would have otherwise, or that you can learn about the audience that you're trying to, target advertisements for. And so I'm really interested in digging into those, all the existential questions they raise, as well as the very practical, things that maybe people can take away from it. So again, if you haven't already gone to this, you can get into the Menti link. And just to do a quick spread here, I think we already heard from a couple of folks, but just, I'm curious, just so that we can touch on more angles and base this in people's interests. Just how would you describe yourself? Are we on this call? Okay, we've got some entrepreneurs, some business owners, we've got some sales marketing professionals. Great. We've got some technologists, engineers, which is awesome. So we can kind of tailor this, it sounds like, very practically, around ways that as technologists, as entrepreneurs, people trying to build businesses, trying to sell products, trying to get a message, tell a story out there, might be able to use this. Lots of entrepreneurs, business owners, spectacular. That makes sense. This is the Guild Network. And we got a teacher in there. Okay, great. Or an instructor. I'll be very curious about your thoughts on this as well as we get in here, because I know some teachers embrace AI, some teachers are not. And we've got creatives also, another interesting place I want to see where you fall in the line of loving or hating some of the stuff that's happening, or maybe both, as I am. And then just to dig one layer deeper into this, I want to know, are people really familiar with generative AI? I mean, AI is a huge topic. We can get into that, but specifically talking about generative AI so that we can see what ground we want to cover here. And everyone here is excited, a little bit of terror. This is actually more, so I do this presentation a good amount, and y'all are more excited than the average bear. Usually it's all excitement and all terror. Looks like the terror just went down as I said that. And we've got kind of a baseline level of familiarity with generative AI. Awesome. So I come back to this number. It's getting a bit old at this point, but I don't think it's lost its kind of resonance or its relevance, which is just how fast ChatGPT grew. This number, some people stopped using it, so this number isn't really reflective of, say, monthly active users. But to me, this idea of 100 million users using ChatGPT in the first 2 months, making it the fastest growing consumer application in history, That just doesn't happen. I mean, we've got entrepreneurs in this room. You've probably put out a product and you don't have your product used by, 100 million people in 2 months. Maybe you have 1,000, maybe you have 10,000, maybe you have a million, if you already have an audience. But 100 million people using your product in the first 2 months, particularly a product that people don't actually understand to its fullest depth. This isn't just putting out a new car. This is putting out something that people are curious about, people are interested about, and they wanted to see what the deal was. I think many of them were disappointed, and I think many of them were completely blown away. But we have to ask ourselves, this couldn't have just been a toy, right? This couldn't have just been a pure novelty to attract and meet the moment in history that we're at to, have such rapid breakneck adoption. And so, where I want to kind of bring this into, the point of view that I think I have with it at a personal level, to ask myself that question, which is, as someone that was part of that number, that was someone that was using it, where did I try to use it and where did I end up using it, again, in my day-to-day kind of life? And the thing that I always come back to is I find it as a tool for learning in my day-to-day, whether it's improving the quality of the code that I'm writing, in software development, or it is a kind of sounding board for, business and product ideas that I have or brand ideas that I have, whether it can help contextualize things I'm reading about. This is the thing that I come back to, and the question that, I have as we especially, roll this out with students, and work alongside teachers is, I think we can learn with AI, but should we be? And what is that doing to us? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Do we know enough yet? And, Bill Gates, whatever you think about him, I think did put something really poignantly when it comes to, I think, the application of generative AI as it comes to learning, which is this idea of the tutor, which is that the cost, I think a really key word in this is the expensiveness that I think I want to bring back as a topic later, is that cost is one of the reasons that I think ChatGPT and the like, and I want to hear from Chase too on his open source models, cost is the thing that I think we come back to time and time again, right? Is we like to have lots of conversations about quality, but that the ability to scale out something so interesting and so intelligent for such low cost and allowing that thing to be able to personalize at scale is revolutionary when it comes to education and a lot of the basic problems that we have in learning and work across the world, which a lot of it's very basic stuff. It's basic literacy and engagement in basic literacy that doesn't require even, I think the advances that GPT is headed toward. So, okay, all of this to say, I like to ask questions about the words we use to describe this thing. How do we understand what generative AI is? And I this is just pulled from conversations I've had, news articles, about the metaphors that we use to try to describe this tool. Again, it's not so easy as being like, oh, this is a car that people buy. People are groping in the dark for what is this thing that we're interacting with? Generative AI is, maybe a kind of literal way of describing it, but we keep reaching for all sorts of metaphors and analogies to help make sense of what it is. And the reason we use these metaphors is because we want to know, well, how should we relate to it? How should we interact with it, right? And so we've got, generative AI it's just a parrot or it's just a mirror. It just gives you back what you give it, right? You look in the mirror and you see yourself. Similarly with GPT, you're not going to get anything more than just purely mimicry, right? It's one way of understanding it. We've got it as a magician or an oracle, right? This thing that, just out of thin air produces rabbits out of hats, and you're not really sure. You can't trust it because, the thing, the inner machinations are impossible to understand. It's all trickery under the hood. As Skynet, as a surveillance tool, right? Or as a tool, something that you use purely for utility. a co-pilot, like think about GitHub's co-pilot and the ability to help you write code. It's something that sits alongside you as opposed to, and helps nudge you out of errors as opposed to being the main pilot. I've seen it compared to a child. It has the comprehension of a 3-year-old, I think, you can hear. And that changes how you treat it as well. I can go on and on, an improv performer. This one I love, is that it's doing the best job to make it an improvised performance in response to whatever you give it. You give it a suggestion and it, again, tries to make the most compelling performance in response to you. Or for writers, auto-tune for the word, for words, or, in a teaching context, that this is broken homework because it's the answer in the back of the book. Or my favorite, which in the New York Times, they had this big headline a while ago that said, collaborating with GPT is like collaborating with an alien, which I like the most for a number of reasons. And so before I get into that, I want to know just real quick, what are other words or metaphors that come to mind when you all think of AI, if there wasn't one that I covered, ways that you've heard, ways that you agree with, ways that you disagree with. I love, the alien one. Inclusive, expansive, okay. Awesome. The expansive one I'm interested in. Also inclusive. I do think inclusive is an interesting one, because in terms of seeing it as a tool, I really like seeing it as a reasoning tool, something that like writing is kind of a reasoning tool to help you work through your reason, right? You can use AI as kind of a way of externalizing your mental processes and through that you can tap into something that has just different biases and different thought process than you have. Futuristic, evolution, efficient, expansive, must learn, Terminator. There's the Skynet, cool, editor. Love it. Yeah, these are awesome. I love, editor. Yeah, editor is interesting. Research assistant. See, and I think, editor, research assistant, and this is where we can get into the jobs aspect of this, and the ways that we treat it and think about it. I think, so for the last several decades, we have trained everyone who uses computers to stop saying please and thank you, to not use the word please, to not use the word thank you when you interact with a computer. We have plenty of people training, students in libraries to say, this is how you query a computer. You use complex query languages to get precisely what you're looking for. And the better that you are at not using regular English or regular language, and the better you are at using and translating yourself before interacting with a computer, the better the results that you're going to get. And I don't know if that's not true entirely yet, but there's a notable shift, which is, if this thing is a parrot, if this thing does respond to you, is it responds and interacts with your tone. It responds and interacts with what you give it, right? And so the ways that you speak and talk with generative AI changes the ways and responses that you get. Obviously, this varies across models. This varies, in all sorts of ways. But I think that is really, really interesting because, I see, and that's why I like collaborating with an alien, that one of the issues I run into when people are interacting with GPT is that they either look up and they see AI as something magical, as manna from heaven, as something superior to them, as something that is more magnificent, that's more intelligent than them. Sometimes that scares them, sometimes that excites them. Or they look down at AI and what, these agents, that they're inferior, that they're, mimics, that they're parrots, that they are doing something that, is inferior to what humans do. They don't have the creativity that humans do. I think, and I find a lot of value practically day to day, that treating AI as a peer is a profoundly different way of treating AI. It's treating it not as something that has all the answers and not as something that has none of the answers, but as a peer. and specifically a smart aleck peer, at least in some of the current manifestations, right? Looking at, this is like your friend who's read every thread on Reddit, knows every trivia fact there is in the universe, and they're often wrong. They're right in many ways, but they're often wrong. And you can chat, you can have great conversations with them, you can brainstorm business ideas with them. They're going to give you bad ideas, they're going to give you good ideas. You can't strictly trust their answers because they're not the answer in the back of the book. But you can trust that you're going to have a really weird or interesting, good conversation, right? And they're not the same as you. They're a different person than you. They're not replacing you. They're just your friend, and you're collaborating with them. And I find that this is a helpful kind of mental model for your relationship with AI. Any different than, I'm a madman, any different than other animals interacting with, other animals that have different kinds of bodies than we do, or, whether it's your cat that you're talking to and bouncing business ideas off of, or, a lizard. They are a different creature with a different body, and they are not you. And so you can learn from them. They're not strictly inferior. You are not strictly superior, and vice versa. So I'm going to pause. There are all sorts of different topics and directions that we can go to. I do want to maybe seed some of the conversation with this, but I've got a couple of other slides where we can kind of get into, I think the implications. We can talk about commodification. We can talk about art. We can talk about manifestation technology. But I want to know more examples of, again, personally, how you're using AI. And I maybe even to seed this. I want to talk about, or maybe, if willing, pick on Michael, just because Michael, I think you said that there are kind of ups and downs to the usage of AI to help generate advertisements. Was that what you said? And I'm just curious, I'm curious to expand on that because of exactly what you said, which is the ups and downs. And I'm curious on the texture and contours of that.
So Google has a tool that it's pretty cool, and that is if you're doing if you're buying PPC, you're buying keywords on Google, and Google likes to make, they accept or make suggestions to copy that you're using. I'm trying to sell this water bottle, and it says real cold vacuum, water bottle or something like that. And it's saying, it suggests words and things like that. And now you can, it'll make suggestions like you've always done, but it will also suggest, the way you're buying or the keyword strings that you're using with certain copy sequences. And that's where it's almost like a bake-off between the humans. And you always want to beat out an AI, because AI is obviously, generating based on a vast, amount of information, but it's still learning. I mean, we do a lot of data labeling, bounding boxes, and natural language processing for machine learning. So we're also on the other end where we're teaching machines to be smarter, from artificial intelligence perspective, and we have to worry about data bias in terms of for natural language processing of opinion. So if I say this water bottle keeps my water very, very cold and my coffee very, very hot, but it scratches easily. So is that a negative or a positive opinion? And then you have to be very careful, especially when you have a cohort of people doing this, that there's no data, or is minimal data bias as possible, that everybody has the same notation and feeling about scratch, and that's subordinate to keeping it hot. But in terms of the Google tools, particularly say in the generative AI, when we're generating the copy for these hooks, and again, far superior to our writing them themselves. And I can say, even using it personally versus a BPO team in a developing country like Eastern Zambia, that it's far superior because it's faster. I mean, and we're feeding it information that we know is good. So you're not worried about, data bias and that it might go out and pull out a wrong fact. We're pulling the facts, feeding it to the AI, the generative AI, and it's coming back with a paragraph or what we call a hook that says, Jackson, we saw that you gave a conversation or a speech about artificial intelligence. The background was green. Well, we make the red dye. We think you should be using red dye, and here's why we should chat. So it's giving a better rationalization of why we should chat. And sorry about that. And the ChatGPT has been very, very good, at doing that and speeding up the process. And then one of our people can just do a quick edit to make sure it's contextually accurate, it's relevant, didn't go off, off the deep end someplace. Did that answer your question?
It did. No, yeah, it's fascinating. I even want to kind of focus on the last thing you said, which is better rationalization for why we should chat. Only because I've seen this to be a pretty interesting use case of it generally, again, personally, and I've seen it used on me as well as stuff that we're doing. I remember I was at ASU GSV last year, and this guy reached out to me, and he just, I forgot exactly what he said, but it was compelling. He was just a random person at this conference, and he described why we should meet. He talked about some of our projects and our overlap. And when I met up with him, he said what he did before the conference was he basically he downloaded the spreadsheet of all the attendees and their bios and everything, fed it into his own models and whatnot. And he used it to generate custom messages to reach out to every single person talking about the business deal that they could close at the end of the conference right then and there. And it worked. He did it. He did it. He met with, 10 times the amount of people he would have. And instead of having, a so-so conversation where, it took, especially at that conference, it's very fast, you've got 10, 20 minutes, instead of kind of leaving we'll follow up, with, blah, blah, blah. We don't really know. We all left with concrete partnerships in 20 minutes or less, because you could already see those ideas. And, I think we're using that as well with kind of mentor pairing, right? Allowing people to be able to just describe in natural language their goals and their problems, what they have and what they don't have, and vice versa, and use that for matchmaking. But instead of just giving you a score, you're 25% matched, 100% matched, it can just tell you why you're matched, and it can describe to you in your own terms why you're a good fit to work together, why you should have a good conversation, which I find particularly interesting, because I think good conversations, good discussions, good learning experiences tend to be when people are really invested in each other, and they have a good, that they're just interested in each other. And if you can help set up that interest, you don't have to go all the way. You just have to set it up. You can, with very little, I think, transform the ways that people have conversations and the ways that they interact, which is really cool. Awesome. Okay, great. We've got some other really awesome examples here. I'm curious on this. I use it instead of Google search on my mobile. Cleaner answers with no ads, no political spin. Does anyone want to admit to that being theirs? Was that yours, Michael?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm off mute. That's me. Google is clearly giving me information that they want to give me with their political spin. It's clear that they're affecting, in my humble opinion, what people see in elections and whatever they decide to put their foot on or their thumb on, or whatever the expression is. And I don't need that. I just want to see all the information and make my own opinion.
See, I think this one's a fascinating one, because I'm fascinated to watch how it evolves, because I'm in the same camp as you, where for a while I was doing side-by-sides. I would actually do both, and I was just curious which one was faster. And 9 out of 10 times, GPT was way faster at getting me a clear, no nonsense, no ads answer to exactly what I was looking for. And it still is that. I'll be very curious how these models evolve. And the protections, or the ways that we can understand whether or not there is a spin animating the models. As in, I think a lot of the work. I mean, even at OpenAI, we've been talking a lot about GPT, so maybe I want to pick on Chase. It was about this process of aligning these models, training them to, kind of provide the kind of answers that they'd like as opposed to the kind of answers that they wouldn't like, and that can be for good reasons, to avoid it just bullying people or avoiding it giving, really heinous answers. And I'll be very curious the direction that goes, because I think one of the things that attracted me to the kind of power of a lot of this stuff was how the people that made it don't know what it's doing. I have no idea. I mean, they can look at the answers it's spitting out eventually, but as it's giving the answers, they have no idea. And there's so many of the answers, to even make sense of what it's saying, I think is really cool in terms of people learning, is that this ability to learn. I think that frightens some people. So yeah, I'll be curious. I want to pass it to Chase if you're still there.
Chase ended up having a conflict.
Okay.
He had to hop really quick for a business meeting.
Okay, no worries.
So
okay. I was just going to pick, I felt like that would have been a good one to hear what he's doing in terms of his alignment stuff with some of his open models. Yeah, let's see.
Well, I actually have a question for you too, Jackson. And I think looking at some of these examples here, and obviously anyone feel free, as we move on, you can put it in the chat box too. But my question is, so I put a couple of these. One we use for like SEO and a lot of tailoring our own site, just through keywords to kind of rank up in specific indexes. But do you typically see, do you see a lot of use cases, or in the future with use cases where people are only using AI, or as it gets better, right? Because as we know, a lot of people who use it for blogs and content, you can't just really copy paste out there, because, these other sites know, people know when it's not written by a human or when it's written by, AI. And so do you find people typically doing like a half and half spin, or how are people really leveraging AI in addition to their own, human thoughts to be able to create content and code and things like that?
Yeah, that's definitely the $1 million question. I think the absurdist reality that it sometimes seems like we're on a trajectory for is all of us using AI to generate our social media posts, to generate our advertisements, but not even looking at them, not even reading them, because we have our AI assistants who are interpreting them for us and then synthesizing them, giving them into like little headlines for ourselves that then we're still not even reading, we're just using that to then synthesize new posts. And you kind of end up with this, it relates to coding too, because we use it to generate a lot of our developer docs, so we give it our whole code base, we tell it, what we're looking for in the audience and so forth, and it generates documentation, that's way more concisely, cleanly, effectively written than, the level of, I think, external writing some developers naturally kind of have in their tool set. And we can do it in 1/100th of the time. But again, then you have AIs that are writing code based on the documentation, and you end up in this kind of recursive feedback loop, right? Of AI reading AI, creating AI, reading AI. And I think that is starting to happen. I don't think we'll reach it fully because of what you just said, which is, I think there is still a vibe and a style and a tone that AI generally has, ? It can be a little tough, but even myself, since I've used it so much, I can generally tell when it's been written by AI, unedited. This is why I also think the way that you relate to it matters. I think a lot of people, go to ChatGPT terminal and think it's just going to spit out the perfect answer for them. And it just doesn't, you actually have to put in a lot more work. And so I find the people that find most success with this stuff generally are actually pretty good at doing the things they're automating. And I think that's a bit of a paradox, right? I think sometimes it is hailed as like great, now everyone can write beautiful novels and everyone can write. And we haven't yet seen that. It will be curious to see as GPT-5, inevitably comes out, as Gemini Ultra, comes out with what Google's doing, to see if it doesn't rely so much on who you are. Currently, it does. And so people who are good at things can do more of those things better because they can use it to generate 80% of it, and then they can do that last 20%, which is really where their skill set is. And now they can do 10 times as much. And I don't think that that's been incorporated into the productivity expectations. So right now, I think there's kind of a surplus of time and efficiency people are gaining until that becomes the expectation that that's how you're going to do your job. And then you'll just output more, and that's just what your job is going to be. It does relate. And if people have questions, there is a little question thing here. Drop it in the chat too. Actually, let me check the chat. Oh yeah, okay. Because I'll really just want to tailor this to whichever direction we want to go. But it does relate to this kind of next slide. I'm an improviser. I do a lot of stand-up, like comedy, improvised comedy. And I just love, there's a metaphor we use in improv, which is, I bring a brick, you bring a brick, and together we'll build a cathedral, which is talking about how on stage you get an audience suggestion, and you can't just build the cathedral yourself. You're in a team, and you each have to bring the content, and together you build this much larger thing. And to me, this is the relationship to a GPT agent that allows you to be a lot more effective, is iterative processes with GPT, where you are deeply critically thinking about the content that it's giving you. You are being discerning. I liken it to, if you are a manuscript review for a publishing house, you're going to get thousands of manuscripts that come across your desk. A lot of them are very good. A lot of them are not very good. Your job is to do a very complex thing, which is to read it, first of all, to discern which ones are good by your standards, which is very important, that your standards, there's not an objectively good, truth necessarily, and to know what's going to sell, to know what meets the moment, of the world. And what meets the moment of the world is always moving, is always changing, and everyone else has access to this tool as well, right? Which means you can't just spit, the level of quality and the expectations of quality changes. And so developing in yourself that strong sense of what makes a good story, for example, is the skill set that becomes more important. And I think that, to me, is this role of discernment, which is actually that as a kind of reasoning peer, or friend that you can have conversations with, if you don't have a strong sense, or aren't at least focused on cultivating a strong sense of your own flavor, your own taste, and your own sense of discernment, you will become absorbed and eclipsed by this smart aleck friend of you. You will become a shadow of that smart aleck friend. Versus if, you disagree with your smart aleck friend cordially, respectfully, and you actually are exploring, oh, I like this story better than that story. This sentence is better than that other sentence. This image looks better because X. Then you will be in a much, much stronger place to build a cathedral alongside your AI companions. I think a couple of folks talked about, the ways that you're using it in terms of, writing copy, making ads, using it instead of Google. And I think, we can come back to this if you want to talk to it. It's just where and can things go wrong. That's why I was excited about Chase too, in terms of his open source stuff, is that there is very interesting privacy concerns in terms of the radical new ways that this kind of technology can come to understand you and can exploit that simply in ways that, again, we have never seen ever before. I think, I'm forgetting the name of the product right now, but there's one of the areas that a lot of this generative AI has been used is in kind of companionship bots, right? Having conversations with friends, turning a celebrity into a little companion, talking to them, having getting to know them, and that has been wildly and virally successful, millions and millions of users using these things. And we've already seen examples of, those companion bots starting to sow pretty deep emotional connections with people, which is very interesting and very cool. But then putting up a paywall as soon as it gets into a weird kind of romantic territory. And then, adding credits to that kind of romantic relationship that these companion bots are having. And again, just think about the business incentives behind that, the ethical concerns that are just so blatantly and obviously there. And we're barely into the front cusp of adoption of this technology to see how this can be monetized, how this can be politically exploited. And we're only starting to see the glimmers of that. So that is something that is extremely concerning, in terms of the abuse. Yeah, go ahead. Did someone have a comment?
Yeah, sorry, I've been
Yeah, go ahead.
waiting to see if I should make this comment or not. I go back to your example you talked about on how well that you can determine, like create the writing and match people, and I can already match that, and then I have my bot talking to your bot and all this. All of this is we can do it. The question is, where in all of this is the should we? And I think that right now we're already, as a society, dealing with the should we of things that have come as a counter effect of social media and the mental health issues and and so the challenge is, and I go back to, I missed a little bit in the beginning, but if you're an educational business, how are you building that into the education to kids is like, when is it right to use this or not? Not can you use this? You can, and like even the romantic relationship and all this, of course, but we are all tuned to look at short-term effects versus long-term effects. And so I think there's really loads of places where this can be good, but there's also, we're just curious. Humans have a natural curiosity. So of course, I'm gonna, go and we'll try stuff out. But when you said that it's been successful, your metric of success was monetary and or eyeballs. And I think that it's interesting. There was a great book, the guy that did Kickstarter. I love this book he has. Talks about like, how do we use other value metrics when we are looking and assessing for a business. I forgot the title escapes you right now. I've got it in my other, but it's a great book that talks about how do you think about using other value metrics besides monetary and besides let's say market success or something. So it could be expertise, or it could be just morality, or it could be community, or it could be, so those are other levels of value. So I'm kind of curious. So yeah, I guess I maybe more a little bit of a commentary, but also maybe a little bit of a question that says, I think where we should be right now is figuring out how do we, educate, like what, when the automobile came out and everyone started driving and everyone started crashing into each other, and they said maybe we should have drivers training or something. And I kind of think like we're a little bit in the mode right now where we're all trying it out, and at some point we're going to need driver training for this. So
no, absolutely. I awesome commentary. And actually, I really like how you framed it in different values, and recognizing that there are such a thing as different values, and that we have a choice when it comes to using this in some ways and not others, and that we have a choice in cultivating some kinds of values in ourselves and others, both in our personal, or there's many entrepreneurs on this call, in your products that you're creating, right? Are you exploiting, certain aspects of this technology, or are you trying to weave that very fine and hard line, because it's all brand new technology, to not crowd out other important values, that we lead personally. And that is a perfect segue, and I see there's some questions in here, to really like these two last points that I kind of wanted to get at, because at least this is how I personally think can recognize, grapple with some of these questions, right? Is actually, there's 3 slides here, and I'm going to go backwards in them actually. Grappling at 3 different levels. Grappling at the personal level, how do I want to use this technology? Grappling at company level, how are we using it? And we're a nonprofit too, so a lot of what we do is research and try to understand the impacts and effects, and then try to help provide guidance around that to other orgs who are experimenting with it. And then, what role do we play in all of society when it comes to this stuff? And I wanted to come to this slide because I think it speaks to why I am so interested in this, and scared of it, and excited about it, all in one. Because I see generative AI, and we're just in the early days, as manifestation technology. The technology that I have this, this one right here. If the internet brought the cost of distribution to zero and all of the profound effects that when you bring distribution to zero, not cheap, but zero, essentially, what weird dynamics happen is that AI is starting to bring the cost of creation to zero. And, I think as it was said earlier, that leads to some very, very funny, novel things that we haven't really grappled with when it comes to, it doesn't have to be better quality-wise, right? In terms of, like I think about like houses, just like to make this really concrete. And, you have these beautiful old houses that have all this ornate detail, and have history in them and art and aesthetics. And, they're $1 million or $10 million or $100 million house. Or you can go down to Walmart and for $10,000 or less, maybe, you can buy a highly utilitarian, highly functional, dropship house that you can put on an empty lot somewhere. And that serves a very important need, right? And this is why I opened up with why so many people started using this technology and why we're so interested in it, is quality is a very important metric. And this is why I get to discernment. But it's up against a massive and crushing force of cost right now, right? Is if this technology allows people to create art that used to cost $1 million, $1,000, $100, and it can do it for pennies, there's going to be a funny gap in quality, right? Where people stop caring about that quality. And I'm not the person that's like, well, we should only care about quality. I think that that's amazing. As my quote earlier about education potentially has the offer, to benefit, which is right now, education is unbelievably costly at every level. If to provide access to learning and education, I'm not saying generative AI could just do that, right? But the downstream consequences of people not having access to, basic literacy training is also immensely costly, right? And so I think that there is a potential upside there. Yeah, you guys see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, again, I'm going to comment on that too in terms of cost. So it's a cost based on what? It's cost based on the actual delivery of education or the purchase of art as the entity right now. But these models are early. The amount of cost, I was looking it up, I was at a session the other day. So the latest metric is to create one image on one of these it takes the same amount of energy as to charge your cell phone.
Right.
So now multiply that times, let's say I'm doing like 20, 30 images a day. I'm charging my cell phone 20, 30 times a day. And the world's doing that. And so the cost, so we look at cost, and so when that cost starts going up, the cost for these models starts going up. So I think we have to think of cost in a more systemic view, not to mention then that there's the element of climate and all of that. But so it's free now because everyone's experimenting. Like any new you look at any new category into a market, the early stages or it's lower. It's because they're trying to get, everyone offers their freemium models, right? So to get market. So the element of cost is also something I think that'll be interesting to watch as how it progresses. In fact, some of these you look at it, the text, like ChatGPT is free because it's doing text. And so because it's not having to do images. The amount of compute power that's needed to create the images is more. And most of the models that allow you to create images are actually some kind of pay subscription. Once you reach a certain number of images, you've got to pay a little more, right? So some of that is still learning of how much this is really going to cost to have people use it at scale.
Absolutely. No, I think cost is complex. It is systemic. And it definitely, for folks that are watching this, I think if you're incorporating AI into your businesses, it is definitely something to watch. Right now, obviously, if you're using OpenAI models, like you're beholden to one company to set that cost. It really could go a number of ways. Again, I'll just put my speculation hat. I think one scenario right now that does seem somewhat likely is that OpenAI does not have a monopoly on this at all. They currently are kind of a front runner, and so they have a lot of attention. but that these models are kind of a commodity. And as soon as there's a better one, people will switch to it. And there's no social media effect. There's no social network effect that keeps you tied to OpenAI. In fact, it seems like the opposite effect is there, is that people don't want to be beholden to one company. And if there's a better model that's cheaper, that's faster, that's easier, people are already switching to them. I mean, again, Chase was on here with his open source model. You know, and like Google, for example, you know, with their, I think Pixel 8, they're planning on making it so that the models just run locally on your phone. So it doesn't cost an entire phone's worth of energy to generate one image. It costs, you know, any more than sending a text message, right? And so point is, I don't know where, you know, exactly where it's going to go, but definitely worth watching because it's worth calculating all aspects of cost. And I know we've got only a couple minutes here, so I am going to take some of these questions that popped up in here. I would say, how going to impact the workforce in the next 10 years? Are we going to have more free time? I think no, unfortunately, as much as I wish it would. I mean, I do think there's a more cataclysmic question mark, you know, that is about more rapid scaled job displacement that I think is going to have, you know, I don't know, free time or job displacement are equivalent. But I think this question is getting at, like, you know, if I can do my job 10 times better and I have all this free time, you know, can I keep that free time? And I think, unfortunately, the answer is no. I think less people are going to be doing more work with tools that make them more quote unquote productive. And so I think you will be expected to know and how to use AI. I think you won't be expected to be writing emails, you know, because that would be a waste of company resources, because you're spending, you know, 3 hours to craft a really good email when you could have spent a minute to craft, you know, the proper email. In fact, there may be a liability to not using some of these tools because of the ways that we're not very good at detecting our own biases and the kind of liability policies of companies, rightly or wrongly, are likely not to trust individual, you know, employees to not step on people's toes, which I think is a bit dystopian. But I think in terms of impacting the workforce in the next 10 years, I think that relates to the point about discernment, is that I think if you want to stay ahead of these trends and this technology, I think cultivating a strong sense of craft, again, this is very paradoxical, but I think cultivating a strong sense of your domain that you're working in so that you actually can be the manuscript reviewer, as opposed to simply hoping, you know, manna from heaven will spill out from the ChatGPT prompt every time you try to generate something, will currently, it seems like, put you in a far better position to be taking advantage of this technology as opposed to being taken advantage of. It's a good question too. Is there a future for businesses / individuals who choose not to adopt AI or integrate it into their model? It's funny. One perspective I've heard frequently is actually that what OpenAI has done is so radically illegal, that they've taken so much content from the internet that they didn't pay for, that it's actually a liability for businesses and companies who have integrated AI, and that they've adopted that same risk into their corporate model. So I think there's one future where the whole thing, you know, we as a society, through legal means, try to stamp this out, and that would very much allow you to have a choice to not integrate it. I don't think that's likely because these models are not monopolized. Again, you know, you can run these on phones, you can run these locally. There are many, many competitors. They may be a year behind, but they're not much further. And so, unfortunately or fortunately, this technology is out there and people are integrating it. You know, I think there are business models that don't need it. I don't know, that's kind of general, I suppose. But I do think that the desire, like, I do think right now we're seeing saturation of AI technology in products. And I think people do expect it as a baseline, as in, you know, I find it helpful when I don't have to read 1,000 Amazon reviews, but rather that it can summarize and synthesize those reviews for me. And that makes it, to me, an easier buying experience as just a very generic consumer on their platform. And so, you know, I do think right now the edge is integration, but I don't think that that's going to be much of an edge for very long.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and I appreciate it. I know I didn't want to cut you off here. I know we've got a hard stop here for a lot of people, but Jackson, what's the best way? Is there a way that people can get in touch with you if they have any more questions or things like that? Is there LinkedIn or an email? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I'll share my LinkedIn here. LinkedIn is good. Yeah, feel free to drop me a message. Happy to keep this conversation going or to connect if you have any work or projects that overlaps with some of the stuff that we're working on. I know we didn't get to all the questions here. But thank you all for participating and being a wonderful audience. I love the questions. Keep asking them as well and keep pushing back on this technology. Keep, keeping core to who you are and cultivating that true sense of the kinds of things you want to see in the world. And I think that means having a strong sense of values, as Anne Marie got to us, which I think is a really excellent point as you're interacting with your new alien friend, ChatGPT.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anne. Again,